Okay, welcome to Stanley as well. We're going to start. Welcome to Hilton. Okay, I'm going to start right without any further ado. Okay, this week's Parsha, we also have a double portion, that being Acharei Mot Kedoshim. And the Parsha begins, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe. Hashem speaks to Moshe, Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aaron, after the death of the two sons of Aaron. B'korvatam lifnei Hashem, when they came close to Hashem, vayamutu, and they died. Um, so the question is, we actually know what happened. It was only just a few weeks ago that we read of the death of Nadav and Avihu. Why couldn't the verse just simply have said Hashem spoke to Moshe and then straight away moved on to the laws of Yom Kippur? Because that is what the first parsha begins with, is the avodah, the temple service that took place, Aaron HaKohen, his service on Yom Kippur. But it doesn't do that. It deliberately frames everything that follows really through the memory of Nadav and Avihu. And it must be that Torah wants us to read Acharei Mot, not merely just as a technical representation of the temple service, but it wants us to see it as a response to tragedy. It wants us to see the avodah, the temple service, the whole service of kedusha, of holiness, through the lens of an era in kedusha. So in other words, what happened with Nadav and Avihu was an era in holiness. Now it's trying to tell us, well, how do we act within holiness properly? And I've mentioned before that this concept that many people imagine that holiness is the opposite of sin. And that if one wants to speak about holiness, one needs to be elevated on a lofty pedestal, so to speak. But what Torah does is actually a lot more honest. It actually begins with the failure in the realm of holiness itself in order to teach us. We know that Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, they weren't evil people. They weren't idolaters. They weren't cynics. They certainly weren't apathetic. They were men of tremendous spiritual ambition. Their downfall wasn't one that they were distant from God, distant from religion, but in fact from closeness, right? Not from apathy, but from real passion. In fact, that's why the Torah says, "B'karvatam lifnei Hashem." They died. How? When they came close before Hashem. So the danger in religious life doesn't only come because we're too far from Hashem. Often, as we see with Nadav and Avihu, it can come even from wanting to be close to Hashem, but wanting to get close in the wrong way. Nadav and Avihu wanted Hashem, but they approached Hashem, and I don't want to dwell on this too much because we spoke about it in Parsha Shmini, but they approached him on their own terms. And that's the whole point. And that's what Kedoshim tries to teach us in Acharei Mot, that Kedusha in Torah is not simply wanting this transcendence. It's about almost experiencing or entering transcendence in the way that Hashem commands us to do it. And that's why straight after the verse says that this takes place, this communication with Moshe takes place after the death of Nadav and Avihu, it immediately goes straight into the service on Yom Kippur. Because again, what the Torah is trying to teach us is that if you want to know what proper closeness looks like, this is what it's about. It's not about spontaneous fire, it's about commanded fire. It's what Hashem instructs us to do in an ordered and an orderly way. It's not that I feel close and therefore I have to do it in a certain way, but this is how it needs to be done. These are the clothes that have to be worn. This is the spice. This is the ketoret. This is what has to be done with the blood. This is a sequence. And in fact, there's so many times that the Kohen Gadol had to change clothing and go to the mikveh. Between each change of clothing, there was a particular seder, there's a particular way that the avodah, that the service on Yom Kippur had to be done. So if we just contrast it with Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron who died, both of them involve closeness, but both of them involve entering into holy space, Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holy of holies. But one was closeness without structure. One is closeness with structure, and that's the big difference. Um, we often speak and say that passion is the highest religious value. He's a passionate Jew. Um, so don't get me wrong. Obviously, passion matters. It's important to be passionate. You don't want just a person to be performing a mitzvah coldly and clinically. Of course not. That's certainly not the ideal. But at the same time, if a person just acts out of passion alone, that's not enough. Nowhere in the Torah does it say you've got to be passionate, full stop. Yeah, you've got to be passionate in how you serve, but how do you serve? It's within parameters. It's within structures. Um, okay, so as I said before, I don't want to dwell too much on this. I want to go a bit further. Maybe I'll just touch on this particular point that fire is holy only when it's contained in a vessel, right? And what is the vessel? The vessel is the tools or the mitzvot that Hashem gives us to be passionate in. That's the vessel. If it's got nothing to contain itself, that fire is uncontained, and God forbid it can burn down the actual sanctuary itself. Or in the case of Nadav and Avihu, it actually consumed them. If we actually look at the whole book of Vayikra, there's actually a lot of detail, the various sacrifices, how many animals, how it was brought, how the blood was sprinkled. And if we think about it, we live in a world where maybe we can become impatient with detail. We're looking for inspiration, maybe rather than instruction. And the Torah is teaching us that procedure is absolutely so important to everything. Very interesting to note that we read, obviously, on Yom Kippur, we read from Acharei Mot. In Shachrit of Yom Kippur, we read the beginning, which, as I say, deals with the temple service of the high priest on Yom Kippur. And then, strangely enough, at Mincha on Yom Kippur, we deal with the latter portions of the same Parsha of Acharei Mot, which details and lists all those prohibited relations. In other words, the relationships that a person can't be in with members of his family, etc. And again, a person could think this is Yom Kippur. I can understand in Shachrit the Torah reading speaking about the Holy of Holies and what Aaron the high priest used to do. And part of the service, part of our tefillot on Yom Kippur is a replication of that avodah service. How can it be that in Mincha we're reading about don't sleep with this one, don't sleep with this one, your wife's this, your sister's? It makes no sense. But Torah is actually telling us that it makes absolutely sense. Don't think that holiness only rests in the Holy of Holies and that's where it's supposed to be. Absolutely not. The holiness is supposed to be in every part of our lives, even those intimate moments of intimacy. Kedusha holiness doesn't just remain in a fixed place in the temple. It has to enter family. It has to enter our appetite, what we eat, our instinct. It makes sure that everything that we experience as a human being has the holiness in it. And again, the whole concept of holiness in Torah is not so simple, right? It's actually quite demanding. It's not. It would be far easier if it was similar to maybe other religions, where a person would abandon marriage, they would abstain from sexual relations, they would deny any pleasures of the physical world, and that's absolute separation. But we know Torah doesn't do that. Torah says we're supposed to be involved in the physical world. But it's about bringing the Kedusha, it's about bringing the holiness into the world, into every aspect of our lives. So that's Acharei Mot. Acharei Mot is the temple service. It specifically says it comes after the death of Nadav and Avihu because they came close to Hashem on their own terms. Then we follow with absolute detail what was the temple service by telling us coming close to Hashem has to be on His terms. It can't just be that you're passionate full stop. You have to be passionate within the parameters that Torah gives us and Hashem gives us. And part of Acharei Mot is also, as I said, those forbidden sexual relationships, again, to teach us that holiness is not just on Yom Kippur, it's not just in shul, it's not just in the temple, but it has to be in every aspect of our life, however human or basic or mundane they happen to be. Okay, and then in Parshas Kedoshim, and it's absolutely linked to this, and this is so why they're often linked together, Acharei Mot Kedoshim. The Parsha of Kedoshim begins that you should speak to the entire assembly of Israel, Vamarta Alehem, and tell them, it's a command actually, Kedoshim Tihiyu, be holy. Why? Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokeichem, because I, Hashem your God, am holy. So if that's a commandment, right? Be holy. What does it mean? What does it mean to be holy? So Rashi goes the route of separation to say that we need to separate from forbidden immorality. And Rashi just links to what comes in the previous parsha of Acharei Mot, where it speaks about sexual immorality and the forbidden relationships. So if you want to know how to remain holy, make sure you separate from those forbidden immorality. But Ramban and so many others say that it's much more to holiness than that. It's not only refraining from that which is impermissible, that which is forbidden. It means also that even in the area of permissibility, where Torah allows us to do certain things, we have to make sure that we're doing it in the correct way. Yes, that thing is kosher, you're allowed to eat it, but how are you eating it? Okay, so even in the areas of permissibility, you have to show how holy you are, but how are you doing it? How are you behaving in that matter? Ramban would say that halacha itself is insufficient. What you need with it, so in other words, it's not just halacha and you tick it off that I've done it. It has to form part of the person himself. He has to become refined by what he's doing, not just ticking off. Yes, I ate kosher as an example, but how did I eat it? Did I eat it in a menshetika way? Did I make a kiddush Hashem while I was eating my prepared meal that came kosher, whereas the rest of the function was non-kosher? And everyone's looking at me eating my kosher. How am I eating it? And that's where a person can be holy, even in the permissible. Okay, I've spoken about that many, many times in other Shiurim, so I don't want to bore you with that. And then beautifully, what this parasha does, it doesn't just then give us that abstract conceptual idea of be holy, however we understand it, like Rashi, separate, or like Ramban, make sure that you're holy even in the areas of permissibility, which is still very, very abstract. But the Torah says, well, do you want to know how you should be holy? Well, this is how. And it lists so many beautiful mitzvot that are so practical. They're so ordinary, if I can put it like that, and they're absolutely social. So it goes on to speak about so many of the interpersonal relationships that we have, honoring parents, leaving gifts for the poor, don't steal, don't lie, and I'm just listing a few. Don't swear falsely, don't withhold wages from contractors, from employees of yours, don't curse the dead. And I'll go through some of these in more detail. Don't place a stumbling block before the blind, judge people fairly, don't gossip. Again, just to list a few, so it's really practical. Again, holiness isn't about just the sanctuary, or when you come to your temple, or when you come to your church, or when you come to your shul. It's about in every area of your life, in the marketplace, in the home, how you speak, how you eat, in conflict, in commerce. Everything is how you show yourself to be holy. If you want to put it in a nice way, you can say that Parashat Kedoshim transfers the language of holiness into the language of human relationships. How are we really interacting with others? By the way, in fact, Rashi, in the Parsha of Kedoshim, tells us that this was the Parsha that was read out on Hakel, when the people were all gathered together and the Sefer Torah was read publicly. Kedoshim was read out, specifically because so many of the laws of the mitzvot that are part of the fabric of Jewish society and interpersonal relationships come from this Parsha of Kedoshim. Again, I'm going to go through just a few. Some of them you know already, but just to give a taste and a flavor to some of them already. So in this week's Parsha, as we already have the previous Parshiot dealing with tzara'at and a person that speaks Lashon Hara, we have the negative commandment of Lot Telech Rachil Ba'amecha. Don't go and be a gossip monger. Don't gossip monger. Don't spread false rumors, or even if they are not false rumors. And again, I don't want to dwell on this because we've spoken about it when we've spoken about Lashon Hara in the past. But often we underestimate speech because, again, it's not leaving a visible wound. Yes, previously in the times of the temple, we had the concept of tzara'at, the spiritual manifestation, but take that aside. It's not causing a bruise on the person. You haven't drawn blood. The object, the person hasn't changed, or it's not a thing of theft where you see the object changing hands. No window's been broken, right? So what harm is there? But as we know from our sages of blessed memory, as we know from the works of the Chafetz Chaim, that speech can be the most destructive of anything, more than theft, more of physical damage. You can always pay back money that you've taken, but a reputation maybe you can't get back. A cruel comment can't be forgotten by the person against whom you've made it, and that's the point over there. And why maybe is it brought again in Parsha Kedoshim, where we've spoken about it in other areas? Because again, speech reveals whether or not we understand the holiness of another person, right? The sanctity of another person. I'm created in the image of God. That other person is created in the image of God. If I'm going to speak about someone else in a reckless manner, it means that I'm not showing that person dignity. I'm not believing that the other person is sacred, is a holy person. Okay, so that's possibly why it's mentioned in this week's Parsha of Kedoshim as well. We have in this week's Parsha the famous, again, Lo Ta'ah, saying negative commandment of Lo Ta'amod al Dam Re'echa. Do not stand idly by the blood of your fellow. In other words, in Judaism, there's no concept of the innocent bystander. You can't be present and see someone insult someone else or embarrass someone else in public and say, well, what can I do? You know, I wasn't the one embarrassing. No, try make sure that person stops doing whatever he or she's doing. Again, the famous example of the Gomorrah. You see someone drowning. You have the ability to swim and not put yourself in danger. You must go and rescue that person. You can't say, I didn't push him in, or I didn't create that situation. You have the ability to now give help to someone else. You can't withhold that help. You need to come to that person's rescue. And of course, there's so many examples one can go through over there. But again, the idea of Kedoshim and the idea of holiness, meaning responsibility. One can't say it's not my problem. Torah doesn't permit us to be self-righteous and to say that I'm okay, I'm righteous by myself, I don't have to worry about other people. Holiness means you take responsibility, not only for yourself, but obviously for others. We see as well, Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Torah tells us, don't hate someone, literally, don't hate your brother in your heart. So again, Torah goes so much further than just managing conduct or speech or public displays of hatred. Here it's really hidden. No one knows that you hate this person. It's in your own heart. The only person who knows about it is Hashem. But again, Hashem and Torah is mandating to say no, because resentment is going to find a way outward. You know, it's never that you have a silent grudge. It's going to somehow manifest into the open as well. It's going to come out in speech, or it's going to come out in action. So Torah regulates our heart, right? Not just behavior, but it comes to not just our speech, but really regulating our heart. The unseen, if you like, the unseen part of moral life. What are you really feeling inside of yourself? Straight after, in fact, the next commandment that comes after the idea of don't hate your fellow in your heart is rebuking your fellow. Now, again, you might think they're two unrelated issues, but it can absolutely be related. In other words, you don't like someone, right? The worst thing to do about that is to keep it to yourself and to let that hatred and that resentment fester. Torah doesn't want that. Torah is saying, speak up. Go to that person. Um, Try tell him or her what that person's done wrong to, how you've been offended or insulted. Perhaps the person doesn't even know that they did anything wrong to you. They may not know that you feel the way you do. Go up to them. Don't keep it inside of yourself. And again, obviously, where it's related to just another case where you don't hate a person, you just need to go and give a person rebuke. Obviously, you have to be the right person to give a rebuke. It's not going to be that you're a person's enemy and you're going to them trying to give them rebuke about something they did to someone else. You know it's not going to be heard. But Rambam Maimonides says that the rebuke must come mitoch ahava. It actually has to come from a great love with inside you, of yourself. The goal not being confrontation, but the goal is to be able to help the person if it's something you're rebuking him for regarding a mitzvah that's done between him and God. Well, you're wanting to improve the relationship between him and God. And of course, if you're rebuking him about something that he did in an interpersonal relationship, again, it's coming out of love because you want that person to be reconnected to the person who he's become estranged from. So it has to come from a place of genuine love. The other one, and again, there's so many, so just a couple that I'm going through. The Torah says, "Lo tikom v'lo titar et bnei amecha." Do not take revenge and do not bear a grudge against your neighbor, against your fellow. Now, it's very interesting because, again, one can think don't take revenge and don't bear a grudge are actually the same thing. So Rashi, quoting the Gemara, gives us the nuanced difference between the two. So what they say, what Rashi quotes, is that someone refuses to lend you their gardening implement. Let's call it a spade. Someone refuses to lend you a spade today, and tomorrow he asks to borrow your spade or your axe. So revenge says, I'm not going to lend it to you, just like you didn't lend it to me. That's revenge. What's the subtle difference with bearing a grudge? Bearing a grudge would be to say, you know what, I am going to lend you the axe or the spade because unlike you, I'm not stingy. Or unlike you, I'm not petty. Or unlike you, I'm actually generous. I'm actually kind. So the one is, if you want to say, is like active retaliation. That's the revenge. And the grudge is just kind of just remembering and making the other person remember what they did wrong. And Torah is saying to us that both of those are wrong. You can't have any of that in your heart. You can't bear a grudge. You've got to be able to look past. And if you think about it, even the example that Rashi brings is so petty, right? I want to borrow a spade, I want to borrow, and it can be blown up into the greatest or the biggest argument. Just put it aside. Okay, he didn't lend it to you yesterday. Maybe he had something on his mind. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he was just in a bad mood. It happens to all of us. Put it aside. Now he's come to you. You need to do what's right. You know, the old thing all of our parents told us, or we're told at school, that two wrongs don't make a right. That's precisely what Torah is saying over here, just in a more sophisticated way. Again, the whole part of that not bearing a grudge and not taking revenge, and it's again so much intertwined in the whole concept of Kedoshim, of being holy, is letting go of one's ego. Right? Letting go of one's ego, that's just about me, it's just about I, centering everything on myself, how I've been harmed, how I've been hurt. We have to be able to take into account the other person as well in all of our relationships. Of course, the most seminal verse or phrase or commandment in the Parsha of Kedoshim is the famous V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, where we're told to love your fellow as yourself. The one that Rabbi Akiva says, the klal gadol b'Torah. He says this is the greatest concept, the greatest principle in the whole of Torah. And again, it comes to the whole point and it cuts through the whole thing of ego and being self-centered. Again, if you think about it, a person obviously is going to feel hungry or feel his own hunger before someone else's. He's going to feel his own embarrassment before someone else's. But again, to love another as oneself doesn't mean that you're going to experience exactly the same thing, but it takes into account the other person's feelings. The person can feel like you feel. The other person has dignity like you have. The other person is entitled to respect, just like you have respect. You have to be able to treat that person in the same way. Whereas Hillel says, don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done unto yourself. Other commentators, Ramban amongst them as well, phrases it in a positive slant. Want for others, enjoy for others as you enjoy for yourself. In other words, you're happy when something good happens to you. You get a promotion, your son does well, your daughter does well, you get nachas, and you know how that feels. Try have that same feeling or appreciation if someone else experiences. Be happy for the other person, right? The other person, I don't know, whatever the case is, any of those examples, gets well, gets promotion, gets a new job, buys a new house, buys a new car, rather than being jealous. It's not affecting you anyway. Be happy for that person, just as you'd want him to be happy for you. So it can be framed in the negative, don't do unto others what you don't want done to yourself. Or in the positive, you would want others to be happy for you and to support you. Make sure you're happy for them and support them. It's unfortunately so true that, when it comes to matters of bereavement, God forbid, shouldn't it be, or matters of sickness, we are quick to be there for each other. Thank God. And that's so important. But we should always try and think, are we the same way when good things happen? Do we pick up the phone, and can the person on the other side of the phone genuinely hear? Can they hear our smile while we speak and say, we're so happy to hear your son did well, you did so well, whatever the case may be. It's just so important to be able to do that. Cover a couple more minutes. Lifnei iver lo titeini michshol. Maybe I'll just do one or two more. Not placing an obstacle before a blind person. Obviously, in the literal sense, we can understand why that is. But Rashi as well points out that suma, a blind person, is blind in a particular area. He is vulnerable. In fact, the idea that Rashi gives is you giving the person advice to sell his property and buy a donkey because you want to get that property at a steal. So a person comes to you, he thinks you're an honest person, he thinks you're an expert in something, he's wanting you to give him the right advice. If you're not giving him the right advice, you're putting an obstacle before a blind person. So anyone who's vulnerable in an area coming to you for advice, because he thinks that you're the right person to give that advice, you've got to make sure that you're looking out for the person. And if you're not the right person to give that advice, well, be honest enough to say so, right? I'm not the person. Rather go to someone else who is an expert in that particular area. I'll end with this. After many of the mitzvot in this week's Parsha, it says, don't do this. And it has afterwards the suffix, if you like, v'yareisa melokecha, you should fear Hashem, you should fear God, I am Hashem. Why does it say that? Because some of the laws, we might think no one else is looking, no one else can see this. Hating someone, doing something wrong to someone else, right? Giving someone the bad advice. No one knows. Hashem knows. And that's the idea. And Hashem's saying, don't only think it's the actions, the behavior, the speech that everyone else can hear. Even things that you think that no one else can hear, and no one else knows, and no one else is being harmed. Like the fact that I resent someone in my heart. No. Ani Hashem, I am God. I know your thoughts. I know your motivations. I know everything about you. You need to make sure you're doing everything correctly. So just briefly, just summarizing this year, the journey from Acharei Mot to Kedoshim. So from dangerous closeness, we go to commanded closeness. From sacred spaces, we go to sacred society. From the fire that consumed, we go towards the fire that illuminates and brings light to others. From the tragedy of holiness mishandled to the possibility of holiness given out and spread to many others. We should know, like if a person asks you, where's the Kodesh HaKadoshim today? Where's the Holy of Holies today? The truth is, the answer to that would be in this week's Parsha. Wherever a Jew chooses restraint, where he could have spoken out, where he chooses dignity over gossip, where he chooses fairness over taking advantage of someone, where he chooses forgiveness over revenge, that's where Hashem dwells. That's where holiness is. And that's what Torah is telling us. Kedoshim tiyu. Be holy, ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem, because I, Hashem, am holy. Live in this world in such a way that the presence of Hashem can be felt in it. And that's the message, please God, we should all take with us. Wishing everyone a good night, wishing everyone a good Shabbos, although a few days to go, and looking forward to hopefully seeing everyone soon. Just goodness for everyone, please God. Have a good night.